jump into a series tonight that is going to be, as of right now, a 2-part series. It could go into a 3-part series. But we've been talking about characters of the Bible since we have started. And we did a series of Jonah. We just got through Esther. And I hope that you guys got something out of learning about Esther and about her life and about the example that she sets for so many of us. And so we're going to jump into the Bible tonight, and we're going to look at another character that is going to challenge us in our walk with God in a very unique way, because this character we're going to talk about, especially tonight, may be exactly like a lot of you based on who he is, where he comes from, and the way that his family is. And so we're going to talk about that tonight, and we're going to jump in. But before we go to all of that, I got a couple questions for you. So my questions are this: how many of you ever decided that you wanted to do something new, like maybe it was New Year's, maybe it was the summer was coming, but maybe you all decided you wanted to do something new, so you came up with a resolution to say, I'm not going to live this way anymore, I'm going to live a different way? How many of you ever done that? All right, like just for example, like you said, like maybe you say, I'm going to exercise and I'm going to get healthy and I'm going to do all that and I'm going to get, how you ever say, I'm going to get exercise, I'm going to get healthy, but as soon as you see a donut, you tackle it. Or as soon as you see your friend with a donut, you tackle them and take their donut. You know what I'm saying? Like you have the intention of changing and doing right, but you don't. Maybe some of you said, you know what? I'm going to get up early. I'm going to develop a good habit. I'm going to get up early because I don't like to rush in the morning because I got to get ready. So I'm going to get up early. I'm going to get everything together. And that is your intention. And you try and you try and you try. And you still wake up like after your 5th alarm. You're still drooling all over yourself when you wake up. You're running around the hall, grabbing all your clothes, getting all your books, everything like that. Run into the bus and you look like a total mess. How many of you ever tried to like get up early and that happens? Yeah. Or how about this? How about you said, you know what? I'm not going to watch as much Netflix anymore or Hulu. I'm not going to spend all of that time. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to do some production. I'm going to read a thing called a book, and I'm going to read a book, or I'm not going to spend that much time watching TV anymore. But then all of a sudden, 8 hours later, you binge watch through 5 seasons, you got Cheetos all over your face, and you don't even know what day it is. How many of you have ever been there? Like, your intentions were good, right? Like, I'm not gonna watch this anymore. Like, I'm going to change to do something new. Or how about this one? This is a very common one, especially with teenagers, that you make this decision that you're going to be a nicer person. Like, I'm going to be nice. I'm not going to be mean anymore. See, some of you, I'm not looking at you because I know, you know. And you're like, listen, I'm going to be nice. So you wake up, you go to school, and you're in a good mood. You're in a nice mood. You're doing really well. And then someone does something to you, and you want to push them down the stairs. You know what I'm saying? Like, you had intentions of being nice, and you tried, but it didn't work. Or we can go this way, that maybe you had intentions of not being a type of person that you were, wanting to change to be someone different, but you keep going back to that old person. Maybe you said, you know what, I'm not gonna gossip about people anymore. What happens is you go back to that cycle of gossip. I'm not gonna lie anymore. You go back to that cycle of lying. I'm not gonna have a bad attitude towards people anymore. I'm gonna do what's right, but you go back to that bad attitude each time. You have the intention of doing something right or doing something good, but you don't do it. See, that's one thing that mostly all of us have in common in this room is we have all had intentions of wanting to do the right thing and live the right way, but we tend to always go back to an old nature. We tend to always go back to the thing that we did not want to be. We always end up going back to that. And it's a huge fight to not go back to that. And what's actually crazy is in scriptures, we actually see this happening. The old saying is that old habits die really hard. It's really hard to break bad habits. It's hard to break out of mindsets, especially if you've lived in them for years and years and years. And so we're going to jump into Judges tonight, and we're going to look, and we're going to actually go again to the nation of Israel. Who is the nation of Israel? Well, they're a group of people that we find in the Old Testament in the Bible that God said, those are my chosen people. So if we rewind, we basically go through and we learn that, hey, you know what? These are people that were in slavery in Egypt. Moses led them out of Egypt. They got free. They wandered the wilderness for 40 years because they couldn't get their act together. They were a total mess. They went to war with people they shouldn't have went to war with. They had all these crazy things happen. Then all of a sudden they decided that they wanted a king, and so God gave them a king. And once they got the king, that whole thing became a big mess. And then they had to have prophets and all these things. And so we have this group called Israel that is called to be God's people. The best way that I could put it today is just like you and I has said we love Jesus when we are called to be Christians, we are called to be God's example of people to the world. So we're called to be different. But the problem is Israel keeps going back to old habits. They keep going back to doing things they shouldn't do, just like you and me do all the time. They had the intentions of wanting to do what's right, but they don't do what's right. So when we dive into the book of Gideon tonight, we're going to actually look about how they got back to this old habit, because they would have a good king that would be godly and raise them in the right way and say, hey, follow this nation, follow God the right way. And they would do so well. And then a bad king would come in and they would go back to old habits. And then they would have a prophet that would rise up that would speak for God, and they would do really, really well. And then something would happen and they would go back to old habits. And when we dive into the story tonight in Judges chapter 6, what we actually see are that the people of Israel are not doing too good. They're actually on that downward slump. So right now, understand me, guys, listen to me. Right now, when we jump into this story, we're jumping in, seeing that the people of Israel are not following after God, and they're in some really bad old habits. But this is what it says in Judges chapter 6. It says, yet again, the people of Israel went back to doing evil. Again, they went back to not serving God, but doing the evil thing. God put them under the dominion of Midian for 7 years, meaning that he gave them over to their enemies. The Midian overpowered Israel. Because of Midian, the people of Israel made for themselves hideouts in the mountains, caves, and forts. The people of Israel, reduced to grinding poverty by Midian, cried out for God for help. So Israel falls back into this old cycle. And what we read in scripture here, it says the people ended up going and hiding. They're hiding in mountains. They're hiding in caves, and they're hiding in forts. Why? Because they're scared of the enemy. But God said, listen, I'm going to bring the enemy in, and I'm going to bring them in, and they're going to do what they do, and they're going to ransack the land. They're going to take everything that you own because you're not listening. You're not following after me, and you choose to be rebellious, so I'm going to allow the enemy to overtake you. So they fell into this old cycle. And when I'm reading this past week, this is what came to me. We must remember what God did in our past, so that ultimately we can have confidence in a good future. So we have to remember what God did in our past. I talk a lot about this because I believe it's so important, because it's so easy for us to forget about what God did in our past. Many of you just remember a couple of months ago, you were maybe at winter camp and everything was awesome. Or even a few more months back, we were at camp and we were all worshiping God, and it was absolutely awesome. About a year ago this week, we were all at youth convention. We were worshiping God, and it was so awesome. And you said you had a life change. You said that God was going to change your heart. You said that you were going to do all these things for Jesus. You said you were going to live completely different. You said all of these things, and here we are a year later, and nothing has changed. Why? Because we went back to old habits. But we have to remember the good things that God has done in our past, so that we are able to have confidence to say, no, now I'm going to live the right way because of back then. Remember when God did all these amazing things. And what's crazy about this story is Israel are God's chosen people, and they're hiding out in caves in the woods. They're up in caves in the mountains hiding because they're scared. They're scared and they're fearful, and they don't know what to do because they're not following after God. When we don't follow after God the right way, we will have a fear that will overtake our lives, and we have to understand that. Israel was called to be the strongest nation on the face of the earth. They were called to be the warriors, the mightiest people, God's mightiest people, and they're hiding in caves. They're hiding in the woods. They're hiding in the mountains because they chose not to follow after God. When we don't remember what God has done, it will cause us to live in places we were never called to live. Understand that when we don't follow after what God has done in our lives, we will live a life that we were never called to live in places we were never called to be. You're not called to live a life in fear. You're not called to be afraid all the time. You're not called to be that way. You're called to live beyond that. And so we have to understand that we need to keep God in our focus because of all the things that he's done in our past, what he is doing right now in our present, but also what God is going to do, because the Bible tells you that God wants good things for you. He wants to bless you. He wants to prosper you. He wants you to be successful. He wants you to be healthy. He has all these things that he wants for you. But I remember as a teenager, I would oftentimes not do what I was supposed to, and I would rebel and go back to the old nature. And then all of a sudden, I wound up in places I never should have been, with people I've never should have been with, doing things I never should have been doing. Why? Because I went back to the old cycle. And so when God's looking at Israel at this time, he's looking at all of them, and he's like, listen, this needs to change. So what I'm going to do is I need to raise up, and I'm going to raise up a prophet. And the prophet went and he said to all these people, hey, you need to follow after God. You need to do the right thing. So basically, God raised up like a pastor to go to the whole community and say, hey, all of you that are hiding in caves, all of you that are hiding in the woods, you all need to go and turn back to God. And if you turn back to God, he will help you. But you know what the people did? The people said, well, but God doesn't listen to us. But God doesn't listen. Of course God listens. God is listening. He knows all that's going on. God is always listening to you. Students, listen to me. Even when you are in a place of fear, even when you feel like everything is falling apart, God is still listening. It's never, ever that God turns his back on us. It's always us that turns our back on him. So have this understanding. This is what's going on in the nation, and this is all the craziness that's happening. So God says, all right, I got a dude. I got this guy that I want to use to raise up to lead Israel. So God looks all across the nation. He goes, there's my guy right there. And he finds this guy named Gideon. And Gideon is just kind of minding his own business, doing his own thing. Like Gideon is just like, he's not messing around with anybody. He's not trying to fight anybody. He's minding his own business. And we read that one day the angel of God came and sat under an oak tree, and over that belonged to Joash, who we'll talk about in a few minutes, whose son was Gideon, who was threshing wheat in a winepress out of sight of the Midianites. So basically you have this guy named Gideon who is like minding his own business. I just figure like this way. Gideon is at his job. He has his AirPods in. He's not fooling around. He's doing his work. He's hiding in a wine press. And it says that he's thrashing wheat. And do you know that you were never ever to thresh wheat inside of something? I'm not a farmer, but this is what I understand. That you're actually supposed to, when you go, you're supposed to be outside in the open when you're threshing wheat so that it can go all over and so the chaff gets picked up and all that stuff. But no, Gideon was scared of the enemy. He was scared of what the world was. He was scared of everything out there. So he decided to hide in this little wine press, which was like a little cellar, like a little basement. And he's like, I'm going to hide here. And I'm just going to stay here because I'm terrified that if I go out there, they're going to beat me up, they're going to take all my stuff, and they even might kill me. So I'm going to stay in here in my fear. And what I love is, I love that God shows up to Gideon in his wine press. I love that. I love that in Gideon's mindset of being afraid and being terrified of everything, God shows up. Meaning that even in your worst fear, when you're terrified, God is still going to show up. God is just going to appear to you. He's going to show up and he's going to be there for you. And he's going to show up and he's going to speak to you. And you got to understand, when we don't have faith in God, we will choose to live in a place of fear. When we don't have that faith of God, we will be afraid of things. We will have some things that frighten us, some things that bother us, and some fear. And I want to talk about this, and I don't mean to get too personal with you, but I want you to understand some things that I'm learning as I continually live and as I continue to understand, as I continually spend time with teenagers, as I continually just give my life and see everything that God does. I have found that there are certain things that you guys have that you live in fear of, and that basically come in and they scare you. And it's not like maybe some of you are scared of spiders. Maybe some of you are scared of the dark. Maybe some of you are scared of certain things like that. But that's not what I'm talking about. Listen to me. For some of you, I want to talk to you about the very thing that scares you so bad that it creates you to live a life that you were never meant to live. Let's talk about the first one, social anxiety. How many of you say that you suffer from anxiety? Let me see, how many hands? You say that, yeah, it's nothing, hey, you don't have to be ashamed of it. You have some anxiety. Listen, I get it. That moment when you begin to feel out of control, you begin to feel like things are closing in on you. You don't want to talk to strangers. You don't want to speak in public. You don't want to make new friends. You're afraid to go out. You don't want to eat in front of other people. Going to school or to work, it's such a chore for you because of just the pressures of everything. There's a challenge, and that can all lead to like having panic attacks. I don't know if you've ever had a panic attack, but I've been with students when they've had a panic attack, and basically it's like you're having a hard time breathing. You feel like the room is closing in on you, and you live in this fear of everything that is out there because you're not in control of it. See, you're secure when you're in your home or when you're in your room or when you're somewhere where you're in control. When you have the control, you're not in fear. But it's outside of that whole entire thing, when you're living outside of those things, when you're living in fear. Why? And you allow that anxiety to come in. And oftentimes what happens with a panic attack, when you begin to have them, they're terrifying, they're absolutely horrible because they just totally mess with your mind and emotions and everything. But then what happens is you begin to live in fear that you will have another panic attack. Because you hated the way that it felt, because it messed you up so bad. So your one panic attack sets the precedent for other panic attacks, and you're terrified because you don't want to have another one because it scared you so bad. And see, anxiety, I want you to understand this. Those of you that suffer, and I know some people are going to be watching, that anxiety is a real thing. It is a big thing, and it is a very, very terrifying thing. I'm not going to deny it. Anxiety is a real thing that really happens to real people. And I've been with students that I've had to sit and I had to pray with and I had to talk with to walk through anxiety. But anxiety is something that is out there. And Satan loves to use anxiety because he would love for you to be afraid to do anything. He would love for you to be like Gideon and be in that wine press and be totally terrified to say, hey, God can't use you. And God's not going to use you because you have panic attacks, so God can't use you. Listen to me. If you have anxiety, God can use you. God can use you because a faith can rise up in you that's stronger than your panic attacks. The other thing that I believe your generation is absolutely scared by is failure. Let me just be honest. It's failure. And I know that failing in school, failing in work, failing in relationships, basically failing at life, we're afraid of disappointing those that love us. We're afraid of disappointing those that look up to us or look at us. The fear of failure is paralyzing because it basically keeps us from moving forward. I understand this because this is how I am. I do not want to fail at things that I do. And I'm not talking about losing in certain things. I'm talking about being considered a failure. Being considered a failure, when I fail at something big, it literally paralyzes me. Discouragement comes over me. I get upset because I'm so driven to want to be successful in life and in relationships and in marriage and everything in my life. So as soon as a thing like failure comes in, literally it just comes in and it destroys me and it confines me. And it's terrifying because failure to me literally allows me to not move forward. And what is it? It's the fear of what other people think. It's the fear of failure. There's so many other fears that we could talk about tonight that maybe you have. Maybe it's not anxiety. Maybe it's not failure. Maybe it's other things that you have in your life that scare you so bad. But understand this, fear will make you live in places and hide in places that you're never meant to be. Because God doesn't desire that for you. He doesn't desire for you to live in those type of places. So we look at Gideon, and it goes on, it says that the angel appeared to Gideon, and this is what he says. He said, God is with you, mighty warrior. Gideon replies, with me? With me? My master, if God is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all the miracle wonders our parents and grandparents told us about? Didn't God deliver us from Egypt? The fact is, God has nothing to do with us. He has turned us over to Midian. So an angel shows up and looks at this guy that is fearful and scared and doesn't know what to do because maybe he has anxiety, maybe he's afraid of failure, he's afraid for his life, whatever it is, he's hiding in fear in the wine press, and an angel shows up and says, yo, mighty warrior. Let's just bring this to, I'm like, you're terrified and scared in the corner, and an angel shows up, points at you and says, hey, what's up, tough guy, mighty warrior? Not me. Not me. You wrong. I'd be like, you got the wrong wine press. Like, maybe the dude you're looking for is down the street. Like, I am not a mighty warrior. I'm hiding in a wine press, and I'm scared. I am not the mighty warrior. And when we look at Gideon, Gideon's like, no, man, you got this wrong. You got this wrong. But guys, listen to me tonight. God oftentimes sees things in us that we don't even see in ourselves. See, in that wine press, when Gideon was terrified and scared and fearful, God did not see a scared little boy. God saw a mighty warrior. Why? Because God sees things that we don't see. And God looks at him and says, no, mighty warrior. But let's just be honest. This is what we would do. This is what Gideon's like, me? Nah, not me. Not happening. Why? Because Gideon begins to question, like, God, like, it's not me. That's not me. That's not who I am. You got the wrong guy. And God's like, no, I got the right guy. It's you. So first of all, Gideon thinks, listen, you got the wrong guy. And then when that doesn't work, Gideon begins to play the game that we all play. Well, this is your fault, God. If you would have been with us, we wouldn't be in this situation. If he literally begins to tell God how God should be, what God should do. Well, God, if you'd have done this, well, this wouldn't have happened in my life if you'd have just showed up. Where have you been? All the miracles that we talk about, all the escaping from Egypt, all those things. Where were you, God? Where have you been? And so Gideon begins to question God literally that like, I read this and I'm like, dude, this guy has got some guts. He's questioning God. If God was with us and this wouldn't have happened and that wouldn't have happened. And man, like, think about this. When we live in fear, we question whether or not we can get out of it. And we say, who, us? Like, we can't get out. I can't do that. And then when that doesn't work, we blame God, saying, no, you did this to me. Because it's easier to blame God for us being in fear than to accept the responsibility that we put ourselves there. Oh, that's harsh. I'm sorry, that's harsh, but that's the reality of it. That we are so often blaming God for things that God's like, I did not do this to you. I just asked for you to follow after me. When we live in fear, we question the identity of who we are and the identity of who God is. Let me say that again, one more time. I want everybody to understand that. When we choose to live in fear, we question the identity of who we are and we question the identity of God. That's what Gideon does. But like, you're not gonna one-up God. Like, God's pretty quick. God's pretty smart. So Gideon's like, who, me? This is your fault, blah, 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 blah. You did all this, not me. How can it be me? Like, you have nothing to do with us because you turned us over to our enemies. But God, this is what the verse says. Check this out. It says, but God faced him directly. Directly. He said, go in the strength that is yours. Save Israel from Midian. Haven't I sent you? God got his big voice on. I call this his big voice. You know what a big voice is? A big voice is like what your mom or dad do when you're acting foolish. Or a big voice is like when you make Ryan mad and he gets the big voice on. A big voice is like when you're acting out in school and the teacher's got to get the big voice. Like, we all know what the big voice is because that big voice gets your attention, like the big voice. It's not something that's like nice and soft. Like, no, the big voice makes and gets your attention. When the big voice comes out, you're like, woo-hoo, chill out. Don't say chill out to your parents. That's a horrible thing to do. I said that once, and never mind. But listen, like, the big boy voice came out, and God literally, check this out. This is God. God, the creator of heaven and earth, God himself faces Gideon directly and says, hey, go in the strength that I've given to you, because God got his big voice on. And God spoke to him and said this directly, and it just got real. And then Gideon then got humbled, and he said, well, me, my God, my master? How could I ever save Israel? Look at me. I'm from the weakest people of all of Israel and Manasseh. I'm the runt of the litter. And God said, I will be with you. Believe in me. You will defeat Midian one day. See, Gideon goes back to excuses. God, I'm too weak. I come from the weakest tribe. I could never do this. I could never allow this to happen. But God then reminds Gideon, like, listen, you can make this happen because I'm with you. See, sometimes we believe that we're too weak to do what God has called us to do. But guess what? We are. But when God says, I'm with you, you're no longer weak. You're no longer weak because it's in your weakness he is made strong. That's what the Bible says. So Gideon goes, all right, God, prove it. Prove it to me that you're going to do everything that you say. All right, so check this out. So not only does he question God, not only does he question himself, not only then does God have to get his big voice on, but then Gideon goes to this point and he says, listen, take this meat and unraised bed, place them on a rock, and pour the broth on them. Gideon did it. Then the angel of God stretched out the tip of the stick he was holding, touched the meat and the bread. Fire broke out of the rock and turned the meat and bread while the angel of God. So basically he said, all right, this is what Gideon says. We're not at that slide yet. This is what Gideon says. Gideon says, all right, God, this is what I got for you. I'm going to make you a meal. I want to see what you do. And God's like, all right, bring me some food. So Gideon brings the food to God, and God's like, watch this. Poof, right there, faster than a microwave. Poof, food, boom, burnt, whoop, done. Just like that. Is that literally that he said, literally fire came down from God, and it consumed and burned up the meat and bread while nothing was there. Nothing was left. Then Gideon understood, like, oh, wow, this is really God. So God had to send a fireball down to consume the meat and the bread to get Gideon's attention. Then Gideon thinks he's going to die because of the big fireball, and God's like, no, chill out. I got you. You're not going to die. You won't die. And so this is what you need to do. Build me an altar and worship me. So he built an altar out of what was left, and he worshiped God. Cool. Awesome. So he builds this altar. He worships God. And then a few hours later, something happens that I want everyone to pay attention to. All right? Because we're gonna dive in here for a moment. I want everyone to pay attention for the next few moments, then I'm gonna wrap up, I'm gonna be done. But I don't want you to miss what I'm about to talk to you about here. Because in that same night that God first called Gideon, a couple hours later, he said, okay, I have your first mission. I have what I need you to do. So I called you a mighty warrior. I called you out of the winepress. I don't want you to be afraid anymore. But I got something that I need you to do first. See, guys, listen to me. Sometimes when God asks you to do something, what he's about to ask you to do can be very difficult. It can be very hard. It can be challenging. Because, see, God gets personal real quick. Let me explain that to you. If you are in a relationship with God, God will get in your business so fast because it's personal with him. See, God was so upset with Israel because they decided to dedicate their lives to a different God. And remember when I was reading this and I referenced a man named Joash, who was Gideon's dad? Understand this, that the Bible says that Joash was not a follower of God, but he was a follower of the idol, which was Baal. See, Baal was a false god. He was an idol. He was the fertility god who believed and enabled the earth to produce crops and produce children. Like this is the god that they worship named Baal. All right? And what it was believed, the people, the enemy, everyone that wasn't of Israel, they worshiped this god named Baal, and they believed that if they worshiped Baal, that their crops would be good, that their babies would be good. But check how messed up this is. I want you to understand the parallels this has to us today. They believed that in order for them to have healthy families, they had to sacrifice their first child. They literally believed that they would have to sacrifice, and what they would do is they would literally kill a baby and put it on the altar and give it to Baal. Why? Because they believed it would happen. They also oftentimes in rituals of worship to Baal, they would cut themselves and allow themselves to bleed all over. This is how they would worship Baal. So understand, guys, check this out. Gideon, scared Gideon in the winepress, his dad and the rest of his family is worshiping Baal. This is who he's called to worship. And you got to understand that Baal worship was rooted in some pretty messed up stuff. And they would call it human sacrifice of babies. They would appear to the priest of Baal, appeared to the god by being basically out of their minds, cutting themselves and dancing and being perverted and doing things that were just messed up. But that was the God that Israel chose to serve. So catch this out. because what God asked Gideon to do next is pretty hardcore. He says, I want you to go home and I want you to tear down your father's altar to Baal. I want you to chop down the Asherah pole beside it. Then I want you to build an altar to God on top of his hill. Take the prime bull and present it as an offering using firewood from the Asherah pole that you cut down. It says Gideon selected 10 men and servants and did exactly what God had told him to do. But because of his family and the people in his neighborhood, he was afraid to do it, so he did it in the evening. So I want you to understand, everybody looking at me, I want you to understand this. The first commission that God gave to Gideon was to go home and get things right at home before you can get things right in the land. Meaning, you need to go home and you need to take that very thing that your parents worship and the way that your parents live and what they've given their lives to, and you need to destroy it and you need to point them back to me. So this is pretty bold to ask Gideon to do, because this is your family. It's your family. This is your dad. This is the rest of your family that lives. And he's saying, Gideon, go home and get things right at home. Get your dad right. Get your family right. Take the very thing that they've worshiped and given their lives to and break it and tear it down and give your family back to God. And so can I be honest with you? As I'm reading this story over the last several days, and I'm reading this and I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, how this is so relevant to us today. So please understand what I'm about to say to you. I don't want anyone to miss this. I know that you love your families. I know some of you come from great families. I know some of you come from godly families, Christian families. And I know that some of you, your family raised you in church and raised you as Christians. And that's absolutely awesome. And I hope they continually raise you as Christians. Then some of you come from homes where they don't. And this is going to get personal really, really fast, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but I understand the truth that is going to come out in this statement. Some of you go back to homes that for generations never had anything to do with Jesus, never had anything to do with God. Some of you, it goes from generation to generation to generation, and it goes far back. It's not just people that live in your house now, but it's people for generations and generations that never served God and lived a certain way that is not pleasing to God. See, I want you to think about how you live and where you live and the way that you're raised and how you're living and the way that you're living. The homes that you live in, what you go through every day, what you deal with at home. If you had a choice, would that be the way that you raised your family? I don't want you to answer me. I want you just to think about this. Or are you being raised in a way that you would never, ever raise your family? Because God is not the center of it. Listen, your parents might be amazing people. They might be great people. They might love you. Your grandparents are probably wonderful people, and they're amazing people. But if God is not the center of the household, then something is missing. I've been doing this a long time, talking with students and learning about them and loving them and living with them. And I can tell you moment after moment after moment, I've had conversation with students that have told me to my face, I cannot wait to get out of my house, to leave, to never come back to Altoona, to never have anything to do with my family ever again, because I hate the way that they live. I hate the way that my dad treats my mom. I hate the way that my mom ran out. I hate the way that everyone just doesn't have any type of enthusiasm or happiness at all. I hate the way that no one wants to work hard for anything. I hate the way that this is. I absolutely hate it. And I've had to sit there with students and I've had to talk to them about what is called a generational curse that is in their family, meaning that there's something of bondage in their family that needs to be broken. Something that needs to be cut off, because listen, you are called to live better than anyone. And the hope of every parent is that their child lives better than they have. If I were to sit down with Sherry and ask Sherry, what is it that you want for your kids? She would tell me, I want them to live better than I did. I want them to have the things that I never had. I want them to have a better life than me. If I were to talk to Savannah and Adam and say, when your girls get older, what do you want for them? They would both say, we want better for our girls than what we had. Parents want better for their kids. But you have the desire to want that better too. That better being what God has. That God being, listen, I don't want to go home and have chaos in my home all the time. I want to go home and I want to be at a place of peace. I don't want to go home and have fear of getting yelled at, a fear of someone flipping out at me, fear of all this stuff. I just want to go home and be at peace. Well, guess what? You can break that off, and you can break that general curse off of your life, and you can go and you can live in a life that is holy and pleasing before God. You don't have to live in that cycle. Listen to me, students. You can break the cycle that has been in your family for generations. You don't have to live that way. You can be the Christian in the home, and you can be the one pointing everyone to Jesus. Because what Gideon had to do, Gideon had to go home to his dad and do all this stuff and tear down the altars and tear down the things that were horrible and say, you know what, Dad, you're living the wrong way. This isn't the way to live. You need to go back to God. And so what Gideon had to do, Gideon had to step up and lead his family back to God. And there are so many of you that are in this room that have to do the same exact thing. That you have to be the one that says, you know what, I'm going to go home and I'm going to try my best to get my family back on track with God. I'm not talking about going home and terrorizing your house and throwing things everywhere or doing anything. No, I'm talking about that you want to go home and you want your parents to know Jesus just like you. You want your parents to fall in love with God and not live that the way that they do anymore. You don't want to live in that type of household anymore. So you can break the cycle. By putting Jesus in the center of everything, it all changes. See, the cure for generational cycles to be broken is one thing. It's repentance. Saying, God, I'm not going to live this way. You know, one of the most powerful encounters I had with a student is when I prayed for them years ago, and he asked for forgiveness for what his parents have done. Because his parents weren't followers of Jesus. And he loved Jesus so much. And still to this day, he's the only one in his family that loves Jesus. But he has never stopped pushing his parents to Jesus. You can break the cycle. It doesn't have to be like that anymore. It doesn't have to be like that when you have a family. That you can raise them and you can love them completely different. You don't have to do it like it's been done. But I'm going to tell you this, if you don't do it with God being the center, it will never work. You'll never have that true fulfillment of knowing God and the existence of who He is if He's not the center of how you raise your family, of how you love your family. So across this room, if you could bow your heads and close your eyes. I don't want anyone on their phones. I don't want anyone looking around. More adamant than ever, I don't want anyone looking around. I don't want you talking to your friend, goofing around. I don't want that right now. With your eyes closed and your head bowed, nobody looking around or anything, I want you to examine, where is it that you come from? What is it that goes on in your household? Does your family know Jesus? Do they know who God is? Do they think you going to church is just a phase that you're going to do? Oh, because you're young and you're naive, so you're just going to go to church. You'll grow out of it and you'll realize what the real world is. Guys, you don't have to do that. You can break the cycle and you can introduce a whole new generation to Jesus. So with all heads bowed and eyes closed tonight, I'm going to ask you a very tough question. How many of you would say that my family needs God as the center? Just lift your hand. all across this room, that my family needs God as the center. Jen, Ryan, Savannah, if you can come. Matt. Still, keep eyes closed. I see your hands. I'm going to ask it one more time. How many of you could say that my family needs Jesus? That this generational thing that goes on in your family, that the cycle needs broken? So many of you raised your hands. So many of you did. And now it's the brave moment. Guys, if you can move down just a little bit this way. Cool. Just kind of shift that way. If you raise your hand tonight, there are leaders that are up here. You don't need to be afraid, because this is the safest place that you're going to get when it comes to these things. But this is what I'm going to ask. If you're a young man tonight and you said that my family needs Jesus, I want you to come and pray with Ryan or Matt or myself. If you're a young lady tonight, I want you to come up and pray with Jen or Jess or Savannah and get plugged in and say, I want to pray for my family. But tonight, if you want God to be the center of your family again, I want you to come and find someone right now, and I want you to pray with these leaders right now. Don't be ashamed. Don't be worried. Come on. You can be the first to come. That's fine. You can be the third to come. But if you know that God, you raised your hand, if you raised your hand and you know that your family needs God as the center, I want you to come. Nothing to be ashamed of. Come on up. You don't have to be ashamed of it. Come on. I know who raised their hands and I know who didn't. But if you don't want things to be the way that they are anymore, I want you to come. Ladies, some of you raised your hands. I know that. If you're scared, if you're afraid, that's okay. Ask your friend if they want to come with you. But come up tonight and let's pray for your family. Pray that that is broken off. Pray that they don't have to live in that cycle anymore. If you don't want it to be that way anymore, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be anymore. If you want prayer for anything else, these leaders are here. Just come on up. Just come on up and get some prayer. Come on up and get prayer. Seek after the heart of God. And God, tonight we break off those cycles that we don't have to live that way. We don't have to live in fear, because you can see something in us that we can't even see in ourselves. So God, I pray, Heavenly Father, that you will speak to our hearts. You'll change our lives. God, that we continually will grow closer to you. We will continually fall more in love with you than ever before. And God, as we journey on in this relationship with you, that we always keep you the focus of everything that we say, everything that we do. God, I pray that this changes us. I pray that it challenges us. And I pray that it renews us. In Jesus' name. And everybody said, amen.